Hi everyone, so welcome. So this is my guide on how to execute a good Ironman. This is the bike part 1. So first up, I need to make an apology that I haven't done one of these for a while. I have had quite a lot going on in my life, so it's one of those things. I've launched my own cycle clothing brand, Trent Clothing. Sorry, shameless plug. So I've had a bit going on, but I was kind of thinking about it the other week that I need to get this done because I'd like to have it as a resource for people and as a way to give back. But let's just talk about the bike. So similar to the swim, the swim needs to be mindful of the fact that you have a bike and a run. The bike needs to be mindful of the fact that you still have a marathon to run at the end of it. So, if you go and ride a 4-hour bike split, but then explode on the run and have a 5-hour marathon, that's not an ideal execution of an Ironman. You've got to the finish and you've got the medal, but it's probably not ideal. So this episode, we're going to talk a quick overview of a couple of the key fundamentals, and then the next episode we'll talk about the bike and bike stuff, and then we'll do an episode about power meters and things like that, and then we'll do an episode of putting it all together. But there's a couple of fundamentals a few things that we need to cross off. So one of the things that we need to cross off is riding your bike, which might sound a little bit silly, but it needs to be mentioned. Cold hard truth is that you need to be able to ride your bike in a safe manner, not only for you, but your fellow competitors. So, and what we need to talk about is that you need to be able to ride along and pretty much hold a straight line, not wobbling all over the road. Because some races, a lot of races, you might have a faster cyclist coming up behind you. You also might be a lap course, so you might have the pro athletes coming up behind you at speed. So you need to be mindful of that. You also need to be able to, a lot of races will have a U-turn in the road. So you don't want to be the person that comes to a stop, gets off your bike, walks your bike around, jumps back on and rides away. You need to be able to do a dead turn in the road. You also, aid stations, you need to be able to slow down, grab a bottle safely, and ride through an aid station, grab bottles, grab gels, whatever. So it's something, if you're new to triathlon, it's something you probably need to practice. And we'll touch on that in one of the further episodes. But also, like if you're climbing up a hill, you don't want to be zigzagging up the road. And, so there's a lot of things that you need to be fundamentally able to do on a bike while you're riding along, so that you're safe and your fellow competitors are safe. So it seems silly to mention riding your bike, but there are certain skills that you're going to need just to keep yourself safe. So let's talk about the two key things that are important for the bike: pacing and nutrition. They are the two most important things on the bike. Let's talk about nutrition. The reality is you're refueling from the swim, you're fueling for the bike and partly for the run. So one of the key things you need to do on the bike is fueling and take on your nutrition so that you're sufficiently fueled when you hit the run. Because you don't want to be bonking at the back end of the bike course because you haven't taken enough fuel on board. And sometimes that needs to be taken into consideration of one of the other things I want to talk about, which is the course and the conditions. For example, if you're racing somewhere and it's cold, sometimes you tempted not to take on as much, you don't feel as thirsty or want to take on as much fuel, so you need to kind of almost force feed you. Alternatively, if it's extremely hot, for example, Malaysia or some of those races, you need to be mindful if you're just drinking lots, that you're not taking on too much water and flushing out your electrolytes and getting cramp, or just taking lots and lots of sports drink and taking way too many carbohydrates per hour than your stomach can tolerate. So there's some pitfalls in that. So nutrition is one of the most vital parts of the bike ride. It might seem counterintuitive, but if you get that wrong, it will bite you in the bum later in the day. So nutrition is vitally important. The next important thing is pacing. So here's the deal. If you're doing your first Ironman, my advice is that the first 90 kilometers of the bike, you cannot ride that too easy. If it feels too easy, it's probably perfect. because the reality is when you turn up at an Ironman, it's the first time you've been fresh and feel good to go in weeks or months, depending on your training. So it's very easy to get on the bike, get settled in, and feel fantastic. And it's very easy to go, oh my God, I feel great, let's go. And there are tools to control that, heart rate monitors and power meters, and we'll discuss those things further in other episodes. But it's very easy to just go what might feel easy. You're actually probably going moderate to moderately hard. So if it's your first one and you think this is too easy, that's perfect, because there's plenty of time for it to get hard later in the day. You know, if you get to 140, 150 kilometers in, you know, that's a point in the ride where your neck and shoulders are sore, your hip flexors are wanting to cramp, your bum's not very happy with you, and it can be a bit ugly. And like, if you look at it from a numbers point of view, if you can average 30 kilometers an hour, that gives you a 6-hour bike split. If you're 140, 150 k's out, that means you still have an hour of riding to go. It will depend on the course. You know, for example, Tupou, the last 25 k's on the old course, I haven't looked at the new course yet because they've just made some changes, but traditionally the last 25, you had essentially 20 kilometers of gentle climbing and ramping up before you drop down the last 5 k's into the finish. So it's one of those things where if you've gone too hard and you've got nothing left in the tank, that's going to be really ugly, and you're going to be going a lot slower than you might have thought. And the double whammy sometimes at Tupou is that the wind gets up later in the day. So if you're further back in the field, quite often you might be battling more wind. If it's a tailwind, it's fantastic. It's going to push you all the way home. But it's a case of you need to be mindful of that. So pacing and having some energy left for the hard bits. Like if you can be going well at the back end of the ride, you'll start moving forward, because everybody will be slowing down and you'll be slowing down the least. And that comes down to pacing, and tied in with that is having a think about the course. You know, back to Tupou again, like you come out the water and essentially 5 k's of climbing up to the racetrack before you start dropping down the other side and building up speed. My advice is, it doesn't matter where you are in the field, I would ride that super easy. I wouldn't even be on the aero bars. I'd be sitting up. I'd just warm my legs up. Minimum amount of effort to get to the top of the hill. You'll have a bunch of people going past you. They'll be out the saddle. They'll be throwing the bike around. Chances are those people will come back to you later in the day because they're just burning way too many matches, you know, in the first 5 k's of 180k ride. It's lunacy, but you will see it. There will be people doing it. So my advice is let them do their thing, get to the top of the hill, get down the other side. You'll then build into the day. That's a really good place to start your nutrition, because your heart rate will have settled down from the climb and from the swim, and you'll be able to start kicking in your fuel, because the lower your heart rate is, the more efficient it is to take on your nutrition. So that's the thing with pacing. It's got to be tied into the course, it's got to be tied into the conditions, and it's got to be tied into your nutrition. So that's kind of the overview of what you need to try and achieve for the race. And so looking back to the whole how you ride your bike thing and the course thing, is that it's going to be different for each race. Like if you're doing a race and it is quite rolling, it's almost easier than a dead flat course. If you're riding a course that's pancake flat, you need to have trained and be comfortable in your aero bars for a long time, because there's just no respite. Whereas if you're doing a hillier course, you know, quite often you can even just get out the saddle. It's not so much about going crazy, but just stretching your back out as you go up a climb. You get a free ride down, and then you can push on the flat. So you get a bit of variety for your body to move it around. So you need to be mindful of the course in your training. We'll touch a bit more on that going forward as well. But all of those things, you know, the reality is that I had somebody I was talking to the other week who was off to do Wollongong for Age Group World Champs. And this is an older athlete, and honestly, this person has a very haphazard way to training, always has. It's kind of like, oh, what am I going to do today? So I was chatting to him. He had his last weekend, and then he was flying off the next week to go and do all the racing. And I said, oh, what is this your sort of final polish off weekend, do a few technical things? And he's like, oh, haven't ridden my bike in the Port Hills for a while. I might go ride my bike in the hills. And my first response was, what's the course like? Because if it's a hilly course, yeah, go for it. But if it's a flat course, do you not think you might want to be, go riding on the flat because it's relative? And he went, I don't know what the course is like. I haven't looked. And I'm like, just pulling my hair out. And it's like, oh my God, it's just, don't be that person. Like, hey, that's fine. He's in the middle of the pack, and he's probably had a great race, but it's a world champs. You know what I mean? You're saving yourself a lot of grief on the day by actually having a wee look. If it was me and I was doing that race, I would have looked at the course maps. I would have been on Google Earth and gone to Street View, and I would have been looking at the street. I would have done a recce when I get there, but I would have looked at the course profile. So I would have mapped out a training plan and some training rides that were going to mimic that as much as possible. I do it the same for an Ironman. So it's something to consider, that those things, that it's the stuff that you do in training that then allow you to execute a good race. And we'll touch on that as well. But the key fundamentals are, you've got to ride your bike, and like the reality is, you're busy. You're navigating around. You've got people coming past you. You're going past people. You've got aid stations. You're looking where you're going. Sometimes, if you've never done the race and you're kind of not familiar with the course, there's a bit of like paying attention to making sure you're going the right way, because that's important. And fueling and nutrition. So they're all things to consider for the bike ride. So you're actually reasonably busy for the whole time. So that's the start of how to execute a good bike ride, is starting to think about the fundamentals. So the next episode, we're going to talk about the bike, and I'll use my bike, and we'll talk about some wheels, and we'll talk about power meters, and talk about some of that stuff. And then we'll do an episode on putting more of it together, and possibly just how you would ride it or how you would pace it and things like that. So that's enough from me. I'm glad to be back doing this. I'm kind of motivated to get these done, and I will speak to you later. Bye-bye.